To be healthy in today's world, you need more than the proteins and carbohydrates and sugars. You need micronutrients and phytochemicals. In David Montgomery's and Anne Bilke's new book, What Your Food Ate, they go deep and wide into what we actually need to be healthy in today's world and why how your food is grown impacts the health you have today, and why that keto diet might not be working for you, but it's working really well for your friend, or why eating a lot of protein might work really well for somebody you know, but your body can't exactly handle as much protein as the friend next door. We're looking at the impact of soil health on human health, animal health, and plant health, and the impact that the soil health has on the food that you eat and the health that you have today. It matters. And David and Anne help us understand why it matters and how it matters and what you can do to make sure that you get the food on your table that is going to give you the health that you want, need, and desire. It's all about the soil that the food is grown in. I'm Natalie Forsbauer, founder and editor-in-chief of Heart and Soil magazine. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. If you want to deepen your understanding and join a community of people who are learning about and practicing regenerative farming, gardening, and living, hop on over to heartandsoilmagazine.com and you can join our membership area or sign up for a newsletter for free. Enjoy this conversation with Anne Bilke and David Montgomery, authors of What Your Food Ate. Hello, David and Anne.
Hi, Natalie.
Hey, Natalie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
We're doing fine, thanks.
Good. Thanks for carving out the space to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Sure.
Deeply appreciate it.
It's Friday.
Yes, happy Friday. So let's dive in. I will just begin by saying thank you so much for joining me today. I'm deeply honored to be in the room with the two of you, powerhouses.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Natalie.
Anne and Dave, your newest book, What Your Food Ate, is really about connecting our health and animal health to soil health. And in that you talk a lot about, well, first of all, what I'll say is that what I love about this book is it's deep and wide. So it's not just taking a look at how your food is grown or what is happening under the soil and the impact that has on your food, but you pull apart a lot of different things in What Your Food Ate, from the connection of our genes and the connection of fats and the connection of what we're being told by media and science. So it's this broad spectrum. It's like a kaleidoscope or a rainbow of all the different ways to look at how our food is grown and the actual impact it's having on our food. So I just want to begin by saying thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. And I love that description of deep and wide, because that is pretty much what we're trying to do. There's a lot of work along these areas where people just stay in their own silos and never look at the connections to other disciplines. But there's also, all too often, people aren't really making arguments in public or in the media that are based on a deep understanding of the details. So we did dive deep, but then step back to try and think broadly about how to integrate it. And yeah, so thanks. That's great. That's a wonderful description.
Yeah, and also I picked up on your word kaleidoscope because really everything about the health of our bodies and the health of soil and just kind of, our planet writ large is really multifactorial. It really is all of these pieces that come together in different ways and the different interactions and processes. There's really not any one thing that's driving everything. It's all the way, it's all, in a sense, it's all about relationships and how normal those are. And when I say normal, I mean, are things functioning like they're supposed to in our bodies? Are they functioning like they're supposed to in the soil? And so on. And when all of that is, I use the words a lot, hum and thrum, because in my mind, that means that things are working normally, things are functioning like they are supposed to. And when that happens in agriculture, and when that happens in nature, we're generally better off for it. I think we create a lot of problems for ourselves by sort of jamming these, metaphorical monkey wrenches into how things are supposed to work.
Yes, and that's another piece that I appreciated in what our food ate is, or what your food eats. What is it? I'm
Yeah,
falling in my
what your
here.
food ate. Yeah, what our food
In
is.
what your food ate is you actually help us understand how you're defining nutrients, because like we globalize nutrients a lot, right? Like how nutritious is your food? Does it have the A, B, and C in it? So help us understand how you define nutrients and all the different ways you look at it.
Well, if you dive into the literature and the nutritional sciences, the most common definition you'll find are things that we need to stay alive. Things that are critical for us to actually stay alive. And so it's like we all need calories, we need fats, we need proteins, we need carbohydrates. We need certain major elements in abundance to build our bodies, and calcium for our bones, for example. But if you think a little more broadly about the definition of a nutrient and think about things that help to keep us healthy, it opens the discussion to a whole other classes of things. And most people know about micronutrients, like mineral micronutrients we need, like zinc or iron, that are beneficial for our health, or vitamins. Like everybody knows vitamins are a nutrient as well. But there's a whole classes of compounds that plants make called phytochemicals that are generally not considered nutrients, but that are actually very beneficial for maintaining human health in an optimal state or a good state, helping to prevent chronic diseases, for example. And it's very clear that farming practices have a tremendous impact on their abundance in our food. So one of the issues we had to wrestle with in researching and writing the book is, well, what is a nutrient? Because when you go and you read the scientific literature, different groups will be working from different presumed definitions. And there's a lot of the confusion that's out there when I think, and I believe Ann does too, because we both signed off on it and argued endlessly over how to frame it. It seems like there's a fair amount of coherency when you look at the literature, but you understand how the different players in it have been defining what nutrients are. Because there's a lot of confusion that has arisen from people sort of comparing apples and oranges, if you will, in terms of studies.
Yeah, I think, and I think part of the problem that we're facing, Natalie, and it's not unusual in science that this happens, it's that sort of the foundational principles for any given science were established some time ago in the past. And with nutrition, you got to sort of think back to the day when famines were happening, starvation was happening, there were known nutrient deficiencies like scurvy, right? All those sailors out on, the high seas for months on end, and they've got scurvy. Somebody fed them some lemons or limes or some kind of citrus and went, wow, the scurvy cleared up. That must be how nutrients work. And so the evidence base for nutrients and nutrition was built at a time when we faced caloric shortages and when there were kind of single deficiencies in vitamins or in minerals, let's say. And so when Dave said nutrition is about what is it that we need to stay alive, we kind of all need to complete that sentence and expand on it, because nutrition and nutrients are what we need to stay alive tomorrow, plus for the next 3 to 4 to 5 decades. And so, yeah, we all got it down that we need calories. Got that. Check. What we talk about far too little is, okay, how am I going to get through the next several decades? Because on top of calories, there's other things. And so it's always, we sort of remain stuck in the history of nutrition with just this obsession on carbs, proteins, and fats, because we now know Dave just mentioned, this huge class of compounds and molecules that plants make that they don't really have any caloric value. They're not about the energy that's fueling our metabolism or the kind of energy that fuels our growth from, you know, the original 2 cells up to 40 trillion. That's not what phytochemicals are doing for us. But what phytochemicals, microbial metabolites, even certain kinds of fats in certain proportions, they're maintaining all of that biomass that we grew. So there's the part about, yeah, we need to eat so that we have the energy. Then a part of the human diet is about taking care of all of that biomass. And that's where all of these other things that serve that purpose, in our mind, those are also nutrients. And it's,
Mhm.
you see the nutrition world has kind of other names for some of these things, but like they can't get away from nutrients. So they don't call them phytochemicals. They'll often call them phytonutrients. Okay, that's fair enough. Phytoplant, nutrient from the plant. So they're trying to bridge these two worlds. Functional foods, you know, or you'll also hear that word
Mhm.
sometimes, or bioactive compounds. I just like to think about nutrients in the human diet as the things that we need to first grow, then for survive, and then to maintain our health so that we can remain resilient in the face of everything that comes at us in the course of hopefully, you know, 80 to 90 years.
Right. Thank you for breaking that down for us.
Yeah.
I have one more question around it, and that is we hear a lot about, and you both touched on them a little bit, is micronutrients and then macronutrients. So can you just help us understand what that means? Because you talked and introduced us to phytochemicals, which how do phytochemicals fit into the micro macronutrients, or is that something even deeper?
Well, I like to use the Lego analogy for macronutrients and micronutrients because
Perfect.
the macronutrients are the little bricks. That's what you build stuff out of. And where the micronutrients are, they're like the little weird specialty pieces that you can like do different things with. And if you bear that in mind, you can start thinking of, well, what does your body do with, say, mineral elements that you take up? Calcium and phosphorus go to your bones. But there's others that, and we need a fair amount of those in our bodies to build and maintain them. And so those are macronutrients. The macro, we need a lot of them. The micronutrients are ones that we need a lot, but we don't need very much of them to satisfy our body's needs. And they're things that go into like helping to build enzymes or things. Those sort of the funny Lego bits for our bodies that actually help our bodies do specialized things. And so that's minerals like zinc or like iron is kind of sort of in between. It's a micronutrient, but we need more than just a little bit of it. Copper, you don't think of chewing on pennies as food, right? But we actually need to eat copper. We need it to maintain. It's very important for our immune system. We just don't need a whole lot of it. And it's the relationships between plants and life in the soil that really helps get those micronutrients into our foods. And the only place we can get them, since we're not eating pennies or rocks, is to basically get the stuff that's gone from the rocks via the microbes into the plants so that we can have access to those micronutrients. And then there's that whole definition of, you could probably consider phytochemicals as micro phytonutrients as well, because we don't generally need a whole lot of them. But they serve tremendous purposes in our bodies in terms of helping to maintain our health. So micronutrients are things we need very much, but we don't need a lot of them.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I love that metaphor. And why is this work so important to you? What drives you in understanding the relationship between what our food ate and the health of humanity and the animals and everything else that eats the food that they
Yeah.
eat?
I think for me it is about just I've always been a person, two things. I'm really interested in how things work. I'm interested in why things are the way they are. And ever my entire life I've been just interested in nature. I grew up at a time where um, you were kind of shoved out the door in the summertime, sometime in the morning and told, go out and play. And when you hear the dinner bell ringing, come back. So that's what we did. So, and I was, raised in the suburbs south of Denver, and there was a lot of what I call nearby nature. And when you're a little kid, everything is kind of wonderful and awesome out there in nature because you're not yet jaded. You haven't seen many of these things before. You notice that they look different from day to day. And this is all fodder for your brain to work on, which then leads to, the rest of what drives me is why, and how. So
Mhm.
I think as well, the previous book that David and I worked on together was The Hidden Half of Nature, and that was a whole deep and wide exploration of the role of microbiomes in plant health and soil health and human health. And that led me to this kind of realization that if you had asked me before writing that book, would you ever, how do you see yourself, as a part of nature? I'd have said something like, oh, yeah, sure, we're all a part of nature. But what I didn't realize at the beginning of that book that I got to by the end is just how big nature is and how we're a part, but we're also kind of a part of other parts within all of that. So that kind of gets back to your kaleidoscope thing, and that we've so underestimated the microbial world for so long that it's kind of shocking in a way that here we are, a quarter of the way or just thereabouts into the 21st century, and it's like, oh, really? Microbes are beneficial for us? Really? Gosh, how do we know that? Well, we know we're learning. We may not understand all the mechanisms and linkages, and correlation is not causality, but we do know that the microbial world has a lot of nuance, a lot of gray, and everything is about relationship and context
Mm.
within their own communities and with their hosts, us, the soil, plants, and animals.
Man, powerful. And David, what drives you? What drives you to do this work?
Well, there's really sort of, I think, two threads to what really drives me for still thinking about and writing about the soil and our relationship to it, both as a society and as individuals. And one of them is something Anne sort of mentioned just a moment ago, is that there's a lot of new science where the way that we're thinking about the way the world works has really radically changed in the last few decades. And it takes a few decades for that knowledge to get out of research labs into the public, to filter out into everybody's everyday understanding of things. And these topics are front and center with that. I mean, a lot of the things that we've been writing about for the last couple of books, when we were in graduate school, would have been like kind of weird, crazy talk. And now it's like very solid science. And so if you step back and start connecting the dots, you see different implications and patterns. In other words, it's a playground, it's an intellectual playground for thinking about new things. And I've always been very drawn to that. I'm very curious. One of the reasons I ended up as a professor is because that's, something that I enjoy. But there's a second thread to it, and that thread evolved out of the first book that I wrote about soil, Dirt, the Erosion of Civilizations, that looked backwards. I'm a geologist by training and profession. And that was a book that looked at how society after society has degraded the land over the history of agriculture, and what sort of got us to the point today where we're dependent on very mechanized, very agrochemical intensive agriculture to feed the global populace. And we're really at a point in human history, if you take that broad arc of the last 10,000 years, there's some lessons in it that I could talk to you about till midnight about if we really wanted to go on for a long time. But the basic bottom line is that the global us, humanity, really is at an inflection point in history where we have to get agriculture right to sustain the future. And that means sustaining agriculture, which means sustaining a few things: the health of the soil, and also the health of farms, the economic ability of farmers to farm in ways that leave the land better off rather than worse off as a result of their farming practices. So I see that there's these connections from history, but also that have implications for the next 100, next 500 years of human existence. And the character of society going forward is really going to reflect how we choose to think about and treat the land, and whether or not we reform and reshape our food system so that our farming practices are good both for the land and also good for ourselves, and not coincidentally good for the climate, good for biodiversity. There's a whole lot of connections that could flow from restoring healthy, fertile soil, and wrote a lot about that in Growing Revolution, the book that I wrote in between the two books that Ann and I wrote.
Man, I'm so moved, and I just my body was flooded with goosebumps as both of you talked about what's important to you and why. And one of the parts I love about what your food ate is we already talked about how deep and wide it is, but it's also the way you broke the chapters up into, and the headings of the chapters are really helpful in helping a person understand what part of the book they might want to dive into so they can have a deeper understanding of what their food ate and how it relates to them. And I think that is so, so powerful because it makes it relatable. We can understand it, we can grab onto it, and practice what we're learning in our lives. So, and then you also said, and I also want to just amplify here that what your food ate, this book, I feel is so, so important. And I'd love to see it on every kitchen table, coffee table, and every doctor's office, physiotherapist's office, lawyer's office around the world. Wouldn't that be cool if we could find a way to fund that?
And that would be awesome. And I actually had the experience yesterday in an appointment with a doctor, sort of a routine appointment with a doctor, who basically mentioned they'd gone to a conference, and one of the conference presenters had actually used the book as a discussion point. So
that's awesome.
You write because you want to spread ideas, and
yes.
We obviously think these ideas are sort of integral and important, and so we'd love to figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And part of what gives your book so much richness is the lead up to your discoveries in it. So you're coming from this place of deep curiosity about dirt, the erosion of civilization, and then Hidden Half Moon, and why and how the microbial life impacts what's happening in the soil, and then growing a revolution, and why getting farmers on board is so important, and not just farmers on board about how they grow their food, but how they can have viable farms, which I love that you touched on, and then leading us to a conscious place within where we're at in the world today of connecting more deeply with what you referred to maybe as newer science that we're just kind of catching up to. And that is the impact of how we're growing our food, and the soil that the food is grown in is not just impacting the health of the plants, but it's impacting the health of the planet, humans, animals, everything in between. So I'm curious, what surprised you the most about what you discovered in writing this book about what your food ate, and what do you think is most important that we understand today?
For me, we sifted through a lot of research and a lot of journal articles, and if anybody, we didn't include them in the printed book because that would have made the book,
the reference list,
too big, and we don't want people, and it would have meant using up a lot of paper and so on and so forth. So the list of references for the book, I forget how many it numbers, but it's 1,000. It's something like 40 pages. And
60.
Okay, 60 pages.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And what surprised me about it was that, you want to see when you're researching a topic, you want to see some patterns emerge, and you want to be able to latch onto that pattern and see where it takes you, and then explore what does this mean? And we were able to do that at a big picture and sort of mid picture level. What was interesting to me that I didn't quite expect was also in a number of studies, whether you're looking at crops, animals, or people, how much variability there is out there in how our bodies work, how the green body of a plant works, how a ruminant works, and it's especially amazing in agriculture, despite how we have necked down, the cultivars and species that are in agriculture. You still find in a number of cases, like, oh, there's the one outlier cow who, the fat balance is different in this cow, or we're not seeing these same things that we saw in the 10 other cows. Or you find that, with certain plants, like, this is odd, these plants over here, they seem to survive. Every other plant succumbed to this disease or this whatever. And I found that kind of frustrating, in that the human brain really likes to see in black and white. You really like tidy things, and you want the box, and you want it wrapped up in a bow, and so on and so forth. But by the end of the book, I realized, wow, the fact that there is all of this variability out there is really, really important, because it's the reason that that's kind of the core of biology. It's a big part of evolution. I talked earlier about the importance of phytochemicals for, maintaining the growth and tissues and cells and everything, whether you're a plant or a human being. And the thing that can make the difference is the biological variability that is within all of us. And so this is why also it explains a lot too. It explains why you get somebody saying, I love the keto diet. That was so great for me. And then you'll get another person saying, that made me sick as a dog. I cannot do that kind of thing. You'll hear people say, I can't eat so many plants. I feel ill when I eat that many plants. Other people, I love eating nothing but plants. And so this is the folly of saying there's one human diet. It's actually kind of the folly of the keto diet or the vegan diet or whatever kind of diet we might say is best, because we're omnivores, and part of our evolution as a species and part of the evolution of our diet is that every human population has been able to, this is, long ago, not when we're in the modern world driving our cars around to a grocery store, but, long ago, there was the diet of the Polynesians, there was the diet of the Inuit, there was the diet of the Vikings, the indigenous people from Australia and throughout this country. And that diet came about because they were able to sync up the variability in their biology with their local environment and find plants and animals that allowed them to thrive and survive. And so this variability, I think, is really important in our own bodies. And it's kind of at the root of, there's the one chapter that we call Flavor of Health, and it discusses this concept of body wisdom, which is kind of how it's the flavor feedback thing, and how really great flavors, especially in fruits and vegetables, are linked to phytochemicals and other kinds of nutrients that our body needs. And if you're paying attention to how your body feels after you take in different foods, that's how you're kind of getting in touch with this biological variability that's within all of us. But it's hard to navigate that when, especially if you're eating ultra processed foods or you're living in a food desert or whatever might be going on. So that was the most surprising thing to me, was that I wanted everything wrapped up neat and tidy with regard to the research, but in fact the strength of soil health, human health, crop health, animal health is this underlying biological variability, that if we can tap into that and get biology functioning normal, which is not the same for everybody or everywhere, that's when we all seem to do our best, whether we're, a plant, a cow, a human, or little microbes down there in the soil. It's what kind of drives life, really, in a sense.
Hmm. Um, One of the things you reminded me of, David, when you were talking about what we're discovering about the soil microbes in our health is I did Dr. Elaine Ingham's training, I think in 2007 or so. And unfortunately, she wasn't the one who was teaching it at the time. It was one of her students. And my background is in energy medicine. And we were talking about the microbes. And so I put up my hand and I was like, so if we've learned that the microbes have this impact on soil, what research has been done on like body drenches or like making up microbial solutions for humans? Because it only makes sense if it's healing the soil. There's got to be ways for it to be healing us, which we're kind of diving more into now. Anyways, his eyes kind of glazed over because he was deep into soil, so he couldn't
The
make the
soil
connection at the
person.
time. I often wonder where that conversation would have gone if Elaine was there at the time. But regardless, that's what you're talking about is the microbial life in the soil is actually impacting us, not just by the microbes that we're coming into contact with, but the microbes and the fungi and all the soil food web essentially that we cannot see in the soil that's feeding the plants or the plants are eating. And that is actually impacting the micronutrients and the macronutrients and the phytochemicals.
Well, it's mostly phytochemicals, micronutrients, as well as this whole other
Vitamins.
emerging class of compounds that are metabolites. These are byproducts of microbial metabolism that are produced in our soil, in our bodies, and in the bodies of ruminants, cows and goats, as well as non-ruminants in livestock.
Hmm.
So these microbial metabolites are a whole other class of compounds and molecules that are really nutrients in the sense that this is what keeps us going. This is what keeps our cells and tissues functioning normally once we've, grown to our adult size and we've got, the next several decades to keep
Right.
going.
You called them metabolites, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, metabolites. So
yeah.
what's curious to me about this is I was born and raised on an organic farm with biodynamic practices. And so my experience kind of goes back a while. And I remember when we first started more kind of marketing organic food and research was being done about it. And, people wanted to say it was healthier or higher nutrients, but the research that was coming back wasn't that it really was. But one thing that was really common, um, the other piece of that is the consumer actually didn't care if it was higher in nutrients. They were mostly buying organic food because of the flavor. That was the driving force of buying organic food. And then when I listened to your book, you spoke to that a little bit. And I'm wondering if you can tie together the flavor of food that's grown from healthy soil and the connection that it has to the nutrients that we may or may not be getting as a result of that.
Mm.
We can certainly do that, and Anne usually loves to talk about that.
Oh, yes. I alluded to it a little before, Natalie, in
Hmm.
that chapter called Flavor of Health. And there is, there's some really cool research that was done on tomatoes in that topic area that you just asked about. And tomatoes are a good thing to take a look at. I don't know when you're going to broadcast this podcast, but we are in the height of tomato season right now here in Seattle because we're late. We're not the Midwest, so it takes a while for our tomatoes to come forth. And there's also a lot of different kinds of tomatoes, and if you're a tomato lover, you get into arguments. Oh, this tomato's better than that one, and so these researchers in Florida were wondering about this. Why do some people like certain kinds of tomatoes but not others? What's going on behind this? And so they sat down two groups of people and they gave them two different kinds of tomatoes. One was a cultivar out of the 1970s called the Flora Dage. So in that era, the 1970s, you can imagine that kind of a tomato. Looks great, ships well, tastes like, well, not that great. And So, and then this other tomato, it was a small tomato, more like a cherry tomato, and it was used in a lot of tomato breeding. It was a tomato out of South America, and that, potatoes and tomatoes emerged from South America and got up here eventually. But this little cherry tomato is used in a lot of breeding, and because it has a lot of flavor. So everyone's like, oh, that little tomato, we love the little tomato. So the researchers are like, okay, what is in this little tomato that is driving people to go, that one, that one, that one? And interestingly, they uh, analyzed the nutrients in it that were linked to particular flavor notes. And the things that were linked to the flavor notes that people liked the most were a couple of amino acids, an omega-3 fat, carotenoids, certain kind of phytochemical. And so what we know about omega-3 fats, those are only available in the human diet. The particular amino acid, if I'm recalling correctly, I think it was isoleucine, and that is another, let's just call it nutrient. It's only available in the diet. And carotenoids, the human body cannot make phytochemicals, folks. We're not anywhere near the chemical factory that a plant is. So the bottom line on this research was that these three kinds of nutrients the human body cannot assimilate from other things in our diet, we can only get them directly from our diet, were all linked to the flavor that everybody loved in this little cherry type tomato. So what this tells us is that when this is all, it's never any one thing. So agriculture and flavor and this whole topic, it has to do with cultivars. It has to do with growing practices. And one of the things that conventional ag has done is in necking down, especially fruits and vegetables, but it's also true for animals, we neck that down to fewer and fewer things, and then we stuff those cultivars into sort of a conventional production system. You get crops and animals for that matter that are adapted to lots of inputs, like agrochemicals for plants, certain feed rations for animals, and that doesn't necessarily sync up with the flavors that human biology is hankering for. And soil health feeds into this, particularly with fruits and vegetables, because you'd mentioned organic and biodynamic farming systems before, and the types of cultivars that tend to do best in those farming systems are the kinds of cultivars that don't do great with these high input systems. The biology of those cultivars is more about communicating with the soil microbiome, because these plants haven't been so heavily bred to be doing well under high input systems. So that's kind of in a nutshell perhaps why your comment about people who were saying why they like organic food were mostly commenting on the flavor of it. A lot of the cultivars used in organic or biodynamic farming are still able to carry on these conversations with their soil microbiome that tease up their levels of phytochemicals, like the carotenoids in that tomato, levels of amino acids, like that isoleucine, and even fat balance. So, and all of those things in turn are part of the plant defense system. How is it going to stay alive in this world of, pests and pathogens?
So I just want to help clarify something. So it sounds like, and what we're learning is that farming commercially with chemical inputs is impacting the nutritional value of our food. Is that right?
Yeah, especially if you adopt the broad definition of
Yeah.
nutrients that we were talking about earlier, then yes, it's absolutely correct. And one of the points of confusion in many of the studies that are out there in the literature, particularly on the comparisons of, say, organic and conventional practices and studies that were done from the 60s through the, well, through when we wrote the book. We reviewed pretty much everything we could find. Um, was that the results from that very much depended, or the interpretation of the results as to which kind of farming practices produced more nutritious food very much depended on what definition of nutrients the researchers at that time adopted. But if you stand back and look at all those studies, what we found consistently was, well, consistently, there was always higher levels of phytochemicals in the organic produce.
Hmm.
There are always higher level of agrochemicals in the conventional produce. Those were kind of always consistent. And we can hold off for a minute, sort of like thinking about, well, how much of a difference, health benefit or detriment those two scenarios made. People still argue about that. But those results were always the case. And it's not surprising. The more organic systems fostered the connections with soil microbia and typically had healthier soil. Conventional systems had lots of fertilizers and pesticides, and those came through into the final product. In terms of micronutrients, the results were kind of variable, but on average tended to be biased towards the organic. And in terms of macronutrients, there wasn't much difference at all.
Yeah.
That's where the common interpretation of many of those studies, which mostly looked at macronutrients and found no difference. And you go back to the tomatoes that Ann was talking about, and kind of, the bulk chemistry of a tomato is pretty much dictated by the genetics of what makes it a tomato. It's the differences show up in terms of farming practices through the micronutrients and through the phytochemicals and vitamins as well. So all things that sort of have an impact on health, but whether it's more nutritious or not depends first and foremost on how you define the word nutrient. If you take the broad view of what supports human health, there were consistent differences across the board. But that said, there's also a wide range of soil health on organic farms. There's organic farms that we've visited in California that have, for example, that have very poor soil quality because they plow too much. And we've also visited conventional farms that have outstanding soil health because although they're not organic, they've weaned themselves off of most of the conventional inputs in ways using regenerative farming techniques that don't really qualify as organic, but that really improve the health of their soil. So you can look at both organic and conventional systems as having a broad spectrum of impacts on soil health. And the thing that I think we really tried to do that hasn't been done before very well is to accumulate and synthesize the scientific evidence for how you would connect the way farmers treat the soil and how that impacts soil health, and then how soil health affects crop health, how those affect livestock health, and then how it all integrates up to affect human health. If you think about that as sort of beads on a string, there's a lot of beads to go from soil health to human health. There's a whole lot of systems and processes, and scientists tend to focus on sort of single connections and linkages for good reasons. But there's also a value to stepping back and synthesizing and looking a little more holistically at broad patterns and connections. And what we did in the book, and dividing it into those 4 sections of soil, plants, animals, and people, is you can find very high quality scientific studies that have connected each of those little links, but that don't go on to the next ones. And in part because, how would you do an experiment on how soil health affects human health at a population scale without sort of controlling what everybody eats and how it's grown? I mean, it's an unwieldy experiment, but you can break it down into little bits. And when you put all those little bits together on that string, you can go right from one end of the thing to the next and realize that you have a fairly interesting scientific necklace.
Wow. I did appreciate that in your book too, of how I felt like you were really curious and in a place of almost wonder in terms of what you're going to discover in each of the different papers and the studies and the farms that you visited. And I felt like there was a deep reverence and honor for the farmers, whether they're farming conventionally or farming organically or biodynamically or with Korean natural farming. And I just think there's so much power in that. And I'm curious, though, about what did you learn or notice was most important? Like, what moves the needle the most in building soil health?
I'll start off, and then Dave can wrap this up. What moves the needle the most when it comes to, a farmer changing their practices is that it starts up here. It starts in their mind first. And
Yeah, what she said.
it starts in their mind first because for any of us, if you're asking a farmer to start doing things different, that's actually a form of behavior change, right? It's like asking a person who maybe smokes or drinks or whatever it is, hey, why don't you change your behavior and not do that thing and start doing this thing? This is not going to happen overnight, and they're never going to do it unless they decide up here first in their mind, why would I want to do that? And do I want to do that? And and spin out some scenarios. So I think that's where things have to start. And I think when it comes to farmers and farming, and for that matter, gardeners and gardening as well, one of the things that can help with kind of that mindset and shifting it, if that's something that that particular individual is interested in, a way to kind of start down that road is to go find other farmers or gardeners who maybe have started on that, or well, that's basically it, because we're not farmers. We know a lot about farming, but we're not farmers. And we can talk about some different methods and so on and so forth, but ultimately a farmer's going to get better answers from a peer, ideally in their region or locality, about how did you start to make this shift? I think I might want to do it, but I'm not sure. I don't know how to do it, and I see all these barriers in front of me. So as soon as they start to kind of approach those hurdles and begin to change things up here, then what kind of changes can they make, Dave, out there on the ground?
But yeah, I would agree that sort of the sort of the down payment on change, shall we say, is changing how we think about the soil and recognizing the role of life in the soil as something to be cultivated rather than combated is really a fundamental shift in how one would think about things. And and that would be no new. That's not news to anyone who's been in biodynamic farming or organic farming for a long time, right? That's sort of at the heart and soul of it. But when you step back and go, what are the kinds of things that motivated people? We often found that among conventional farmers, the rising price of fertilizer and agrochemicals and the depressed price of the commodity crops they're growing combines to put them in a squeeze play that makes economic hardship a very real factor. And so one of the things that turned me into an optimist on the idea that we might one day be able to convert conventional farming today to regenerative farming and make that the conventional farming of tomorrow was that it already appears to pencil out as more economically viable for many farmers in many regions of the world. Why? Because if you plow less, you're using less diesel. If you're using less nitrogen fertilizer, you're paying less for that. You're using fewer agrochemicals, and if you can manage to maintain your harvests and maintain your income while spending less, that's a recipe for a more profitable farm. And other farmers will notice that. For after a while, that crazy guy next door who's doing some of this weird newfangled regenerative stuff, if they end up with a new silo and a new truck after a couple of years, it's like, maybe I ought to go figure out ask what they're doing. So there's those kind of connections that I think can help drive things. Nothing fuels success like that. Economics is something people pay a lot of attention to, obviously. But there's all these other side benefits as well. But the kind of practices that one can engage in to try and foster building soil health can really be boiled down to a couple of key things. Minimizing disturbance, both chemical and physical. So that's minimizing tillage, if not eliminating it altogether, and or minimizing agrochemicals in terms of pesticides and herbicides and so on, or minimizing them or eliminating them altogether. And also growing a diversity of crops and keeping living plants in the soil at all times. So not having bare fallow periods. That's actually not as good for the soil as many people have thought for a long time. Living plants that are communicating with their microbiome can help build up soil organic matter, soil carbon, which is important not only for the climate, to get it out of the atmosphere and put it back in the ground, but it's also the fuel that fuels all that soil life. It's what helps to drive that engine. So if you want sort of a single metric to try and think about in terms of gauging the health of the soil organic matter, the amount of carbon in the soil, is a pretty good one. If you want a slightly more complicated one, add the abundance and diversity of soil life to that mix, and then you have a pretty good handle on soil health. Because if you just have a bunch of charcoal, that's not healthy, fertile soil. But if you had a bunch of charcoal in a soil with a whole lot of a great diversity of fungal and bacterial life, that's a healthy soil.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Just to touch on something a bit more tangible, like you visited a number of farms and you mentioned some of the practices, and then you also mentioned like adding microbial life. So what are some ways that a farmer can do that, or a gardener can add microbial life to the soil?
Yeah. I think if you start out, you just sort of have to think in terms of life. So these microbes, right, even though they're tiny single-celled little organisms, you might think, oh, they probably don't eat that much. Actually, they do. And so you sort of need to think about feeding your microbes. And they are, in a sense, a bit like us. Regular meals, several times a day, not toxic things, but things that they can thrive on. And when it comes to that, and you also want a diverse diet. And the reason you want a diverse diet for those microbes and other life forms in the soil is that more diversity is like a big fat bank account when it comes to a plant defending itself against pests and pathogens. Because you want to make sure that like a plant doesn't just have, that proverbial toolbox to push back on pests and pathogens, but a whole hardware store. Everything in that hardware store to present to the pest or pathogen and push it away. And so when you're feeding microbes a diverse diet, and so that can be anything from physical organic matter, mulches. This is part of the the no-till thing. If you have a no-till planter, you plant a cover crop, ideally, not just one species, several species. Some of these farmers in the Midwest are up to a dozen or 15 or 17 species of cover crop. You plant that in, and all those plants are growing. You have a no-till planter that comes along and it pushes those plants down to the ground, kills them, but it leaves this really nice collection of organic matter on the surface. They can drill through that, drop a seed into that, and of their cash crop, let's say, and then that cash crop is growing up in the midst of all of this organic matter that is feeding microbes in the soil. That takes a while to break down. Fungi are really important for that breakdown process. And so you also want to have sort of the quicker, ready-to-eat meals to go. And that's what is in the form of plant exudates. Some of this carbon that David was just talking about, why we want living roots in the ground year-round, is that exudates are flowing out of those plant roots into this special area around the roots, very narrow zone around the roots that is chock full of foods for microbes. And some people characterize exudates, they'll say, oh, that's just a bunch of sugars. And well, there are carbohydrates in those exudates, but there's proteins, there's fats, there's phytochemicals, there's everything that all the magical chemistry in a plant can manufacture, gin it up into their exudates, and push it out into the soil. And when that conversation between a plant and their microbiome is vibrant, it's accurate, it's working, the microbiome is feeding information and intelligence back to the plant about, say, a new nutrient source, another moisture source, the approach of a pathogen. And the plant can quickly respond with what is appropriate, for that particular crop. So this is what's important to think about, is you want to feed the microbes, you want a diverse set of microbes down there. So you want the physical organic matter, diversity there, and then you want these exudates. That is like the New Year's Eve greatest buffet that the soil microbiome has ever seen.
I just love how you framed that. And the visual that came to my mind is it's really connecting us in a deeper way to the circle of life, right? Because I think there's been hiccups in the way we've understood things, in terms of in like give the plants what they need so that they can be healthy, so that we can have a good harvest, and then we eat what we eat and we are what we are. Whereas when we think about feeding the microbes in the soil, and the plants are actually, what we've learned from Dr. James White is that plants are actually eating those microbes and taking from those microbes what they need. And then those microbes are going back out to replenish. And the circle of life continues with the plant growing healthy and being robust, and then us eating that plant and the animals eating that plant, and then it going back into, like, cyclically back into the earth based on our behaviors and how we interact with the soil that is growing our food. It's very powerful.
Yeah, it is. And this is the big, that's a nice little picture of why and how we are a part of nature, and why and how agriculture is a part of nature, especially when we start thinking about it in terms of some of the regenerative practices, the better organic practices, biodynamic practices, all of this, when you get it at a level where it envisions and sees and acts on being a part of nature, is where we need to go with all of this, because there's a lot of people on this planet. Agriculture has impacted our wildlands to a great degree. And if the remaining areas on this planet where we can bring biodiversity back is going to be farms and gardens, that means farming and gardening in ways that are very different than what are mainstream right now. And there's a huge potential to bring wildlife, microbes, just about anywhere on the tree of life you want to look for, bringing those kinds of creatures back onto farms. And a lot of farmers will go, oh, geez, I don't want to deal with this and that. And I understand that, and I understand how some of these things can be problematic. But at the same time, we were just visiting vineyards in California, and there's big gopher problems in some of these areas. And you look around and it's like, funny thing. There used to be a lot of raptors in this oak woodland, but they no longer have anywhere to perch or anywhere to nest within the middle of this vineyard. I wonder what it would be like if some oak trees had been left, and you would have these raptors stationed right there in their grocery store of Gopherville, eating gophers and controlling the gopher population that is become, a nuisance for a number of vineyard owners. So that's the kind of thing where, and if we brought hedgerows, the English know the art and craft of hedgerows. It's not just about just throw a bunch of stuff out there and, run your hedge trimmer up and down it. There's an art and a craft to it. And that can do a lot for biodiversity on farms as well. Just one example.
Do you have anything to add to that? If I asked, why is this work so important today?
Well, I think, where we sit today in terms of the soil problem is that we've degraded already about a third of the world's topsoil. We're on track, according to the UN, to degrade another third of our ability to grow food in this planet by the end of this century, by 2100. Those are trends that are sort of ominous if we don't actually get serious about restoring fertility to degraded land and preserving the fertility of the land that we still have that's fertile. So that's important, but we also, there's all kinds of confluences of this century. We've got this century to deal with the climate problem. We got this century to deal with the biodiversity problem. We have a huge emerging problem with chronic diseases in the developed world, and questions about, what should we be eating? What is a healthy thing? We basically are at a moment in human history where we have to figure out how to farm better, how to nourish the world and not just trying to feed the world, and how to get carbon out of the atmosphere, and how to conserve and promote biodiversity in human dominated and managed landscapes, and fundamentally rethinking how we think about the soil is foundational to all those efforts, and can contribute to all of them. So I sort of view it as it's important because we've got kind of one shot at this over the coming decades to actually try and shift the great ship of agriculture in a much more sustainable and regenerative direction. And you know, I could be a pessimist or an optimist depending on how I wanted to frame the argument, but I see tremendous potential if more people knew about it, if more farmers were aware of the potential upside, not only for society, but for them on their farms, and if more consumers understood the connections between what our food ate and our own health. We could tap into one of the biggest levers that we have for actually, I think, benefiting public health in this globally, which revolves around not just what we choose to eat, but how we grow it. And that to me is the a big part of the importance of this work.
And what role do you see consumers playing in this whole cycle?
Well, I think when consumers, you know, there isn't a person out there who's not concerned about their health and well-being and the health and well-being of their community and their family and their friends. We all care about these things deeply. And food is such a fundamental part of our health and well-being that as soon as somebody starts to dip their toes a little bit into agriculture, even someone who's been, a lifelong consumer of organic food and thinks, yeah, organic's good enough, I'd encourage them to, dig a little deeper on finding out, well, what are mainstream organic practices these days in 2023 versus, let's say, 1963 or 1973, because it's changed a lot and it's not maybe all as great as we think. And so when I think about what consumers can do, I think it's to have them understand that farming systems kind of all exist along this continuum of our practices really hammering on the soil and making our soil health worse. Let's say that's down here. Or are they over here? Are they improving our soil health and thereby suffusing and imbuing our crops and our animals with all of these nutrients that they need? And you could be an organic farmer down here, and because of your practices that technically meet the letter of the organic program, it doesn't maybe mean what consumers think it does. So I think it's really important to understand, to the degree that you can, and if you shop at all at a farmer's market, because that's about the only place you're going to get the opportunity to actually talk with a farmer, like the produce person at the grocery store isn't going to know. So go and talk with farmers, and just, I think a great opener might be, hey, I was listening to Natalie's podcast and she was talking about soil health, and I'm not even sure I know what that is. Do you practice that on your farm? And if the farmer comes back with, you're crazy, I don't have any idea what you're talking about, that kind of tells you maybe all you need to know about that farmer and what, is out there on the table in front of you. So I think it's a really good idea where you have the opportunity to talk with farmers and to talk about agriculture and to hear some of their struggles and challenges, and are they a pessimist or an optimist about the future, that brings eaters way closer to the production systems that are in place right now. And the other thing that's really important too, it's often been said, you read any book on food or farming about that brings in consumers, and we vote with our dollars. We make our decisions and choices and support what we do and don't want with our dollars. And so thinking about where you're going to put your food dollars is, important as well. And I have my favorite farmers at my farmers market, and I talk with them about how they grow the things that I'm buying. And there's some I just kind of walk past, and there's some that I go to them every time. And it's because I like what they're doing and their stuff tastes great, and I want them to stay in business.
Amen to that. And what inspires you the most about what we're learning today and the possibilities that lay ahead of us?
I think the rate of change. This is what we know about the microbial world and microbiomes. You know, you do dietary studies on human beings, you do ag studies, and you start, changing your practices in the soil. You start changing your practices about what is the human gut microbiota. What are they doing with these dietary changes? And it's like, oh my God, biomarkers after you switch from one kind of a diet to another, they're like different in 12 to 24 hours. Okay? So this is where it's nuts to me that we aren't, doctors are not learning in medical school, more about the impact of diet on our cells and tissues and organ systems. There is not a lot in this world that changes in 12 to 24 hours other than the weather. Okay? Okay, daylight to nighttime. That changes that quick. But there isn't a lot. And I think what David and I have seen on a number of farms is, wow, practices change and you can get big things happening. And some say, oh, I tried no-till for a year and it didn't work. And it's like, well, come on. What kind of a behavior change, elicits a consequence, overnight across a whole field, or across a human body, let's say. You start making those changes and you start to see evidence and bits and so on that are starting to change it. It takes a while, okay? Especially if you've been hammering away at nature for 30 years or more. It takes a while, but I always like to say, you give nature half a chance. You give the ability for nature to navigate back to normal functioning, and you are on your way, baby. Totally.
Amen to that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else that you want to share with people before we wrap up?
Well, no, I mean, if people are interested in our books, you can get them wherever you normally get your books. If you have a favorite independent local bookstore, that's always a great choice. The great, the great Amazon also sells them. You can buy them directly from the publisher. And we do have a website, dig2grow.com, dig, the number 2, grow.com, where there's descriptions of the various books on there. And if you want signed copies, you can
reach out to us.
Reach out to us, and then we'll figure out a way to get them to you. That kind of a thing.
And here they are.
That's right.
Yeah, What Your Food Ate, Growing a Revolution, and The Hidden Half. So there's just sort of your image for the book covers, folks.
Yeah, and if people are interested in them, you can read them in any order. They're all sort of standalone books. There is a logic and a thread that if you read them in the order we wrote them, you'll see the learning experience we went through learning about all this stuff along the way. But if you're really interested in just in the connections and the ties to food and diet, start with What Your Food Ate. It basically tries to link all those things together. And then if you're really fascinated by either the history or microbes or how to do it on farms, you go back and read one of the other ones.
Awesome. Thank you so much. May I ask what regeneration means to you?
Oh, yeah.
To me, in the context of farming, it means to me farming practices that leave the soil and the land off at least as good as it was before you started, if not better. So it's basically sustaining the inherent capacity of the land to continue producing at a high level. So it's sort of rebuilding, refreshing, regenerating.
Yeah.
And
So, me, ever the student, I went to the dictionary once to look up what does that word mean anyway? Because, my background's in biology and I'm like, it's more than just, that salamander that loses its tail and grows it back. It's more than that, folks. And it was interesting. I came across a bunch of definitions, and the one that really grabbed me that said regeneration is a normal process. And I thought that was pretty cool because more and more these days between AI and tech is going to save us and tech is going to do this and that, I'm like, you know what, I think I'm going to put my money on a normal biological process that's been running for
450 million years.
Yeah, or beyond that, when all this life stuff started to billion or more years ago. That to me sounds like a pretty good track record. And if regeneration is a normal process um, in that big picture, that's where I'm putting my money. And I really like the idea too that as a very, as the consequences, the outcome of practices, whether they're dietary practices or soil practices or whatever practices, that the thing that you started with is better off, not worse off. I mean, come on, how
That's what I
many?
said.
Oh yeah, uh, how many times can you say that about things these days, though, right? So I that's what it means to me. It's like getting back to our roots, getting back to what makes sense, and getting back to what's doable.
I felt that in my heart.
And
Thank
and
you.
and I would offer just a slight addendum to that last comment, which is that we're not talking about going back to medieval farming
Right.
practices, right? We're not talking about going back to some grand old day of farming when everything was beautiful and perfect, because I mean, I pretty much put that to bed, I think, in the dirt book. There's a lot of past societies that degraded their land. There's a few examples that did pretty good things, and a lot of people who tried to take care of their land, but didn't quite get all the pieces together. So, how I like to phrase it these days is that what we need to do is take the ancient wisdom of traditional practices, like cover crops, like crop rotations, things that are not new ideas, um, and combine those with modern technology and science that allow us to do it with minimal disturbance, with minimal plowing, with minimal chemical use. And if we take that concept of merging ancient wisdom and modern science and technology with a philosophy of building soil health to guide the applications of it, that's a recipe for revolutionizing agriculture in a way that our descendants will thank us for, should we actually do it.
So be it, and so it is. Give it an and. It's been an honor. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure
Yeah.
to talk to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you. That was really great. We
Yeah.
touch on some of the more important pieces for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
good,
yeah, yeah.
good.
So,
So we will share this in the magazine and on YouTube and podcast once we get them up in the podcast via, and we'll share you into it so you can use it any way you'd like.
Great.
And one question I was curious about, I did send you an email asking, do you have an excerpt from the book or an article that you'd like us to share alongside to amplify your work?
we do, and we just haven't got back to you on that email. But
Okay.
yeah, we can do that. And you'd ask for some other things too in there. So
Yeah, because we're going into design for the next issue pretty soon. So if we could
okay,
get that from you sooner than later, that would be awesome.
So
okay.
would you like a high resolution book cover for What's Your Food
Yes,
Ag?
please.
So,
Yes, please.
we can send you that. There's two peer reviewed studies that we published based on the research for the book, that we'd be happy to share too. They're both open access, so you could
Yeah.
share it as widely as you wanted.
Okay.
And then if you also wanted some kind of an excerpt, um, probably the thing to do would be to let us know what kind of a length you're looking for, because we may have something laying around, or we might be able to point to something in the book. We probably would need to get permission from the publisher to do an excerpt, but the good news is that that will
Yeah,
probably be
that's
pretty
easy.
simple.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
like
that's
1,100 to 1,000 to 1,500 words.
okay.
Yeah, if there was a bit longer than that, we could do that. If it was a bit shorter, that's cool too.
Okay.
Something that you feel would just really that you'd want to share that would be helpful for people to want more.
Okay.
Yeah, so
No?
we'll look and see whether there's something in the framing material from the book, or a piece of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
Maybe.
this
Right.
sorry for interrupting you. The theme of this issue is
Oh.
soil to table, so it's kind of
Okay.
perfect for
Yeah.
your book. Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
what else?
so I'll send you those two journal articles and the book cover whenever we're done here, and then we'll look for the excerpt.
You wanted some other stuff. Do you want to get this all in one email, Natalie?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
whatever's easier for you.
oh,
Yeah.
okay. Go ahead
So
then and send her the couple things. There's more things that she wanted that are in her email.
your
I think my bio
pictures.
had shots.
If you have any, pictures of you, and then if,
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you do that. I'll send the 2 articles and the book cover.
And I'll get you the rest of the stuff.
great. And if you want to send me the other book covers too, we're happy to amplify them alongside
Oh, great.
Sure. We'll send you.
your food aid.
We'll send you all 4.
Okay.
Awesome. Good. We'll do we'll do a really good job of amplifying them for you.
Oh, great. Thank
That'd be
you.
good.
Yeah.
Much appreciated in helping getting the word out in this stuff. That's
Yeah.
part of this book business we're not any good at.
That's a hard part of the book business, right? Like I remember writing my first book
Yeah.
and it's all about marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And
Yeah.
this is a topic. It's not at the top of everybody's list until they know it is.
Yeah.
in a sense, but really, it's farmers and it's people interested in food, but it really, you should never say the book is for everybody, but that's truly what I think about this book. It should.
It is. Yeah,
And
100%.
that's why, that was great. I'd love to see it in every doctor's office, lawyer's office.
Oh yeah.
No. Yeah. So, how can I support you in what you're working on and getting the word out more?
Well, I don't know. We'll maybe give that a little bit of thought. I mean, I think this is great with your magazine and podcast and so forth.
We'll start there.
Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Awesome. Well, big love. Have an amazing day. And it's
Okay.
a pleasure to be in the room with you and meet you. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Enjoyed talking to you.
All right.
Okay.
Yay.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Be sure to hop on over to Anne and David's website, Dig2Grow, dig2grow.com, and check out their books. They have links to purchase their books right on their website. And be sure to share it with your friends, start the conversations, and be curious about how your food is grown and notice how you feel after you eat the food that you eat. Are you energized? Do you feel sluggish? Are you tired? Do you feel inspired? How do you feel after you eat the food that's on your plate? That will help give you the information that you need about the food that you're eating and the impact that it's having on your body. I'm Natalie Forsbauer. Thank you so much for joining us. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to share it with your friends and hit that subscribe button and ding that bell so you're notified when our next interviews and conversations drop. You make yourself an amazing day. Big love.